Hi, this is Paul, and I have a very special guest today, Monique Duson, and she is the founder, head of Center for Biblical Unity, correct?
Yes, that is me.
And a number of people who watch my videos, really, after you did a conversation with Alicia
Elisa.
Childers,
Elisa
they
Childers,
were,
yeah.
Paul, you got to talk to this woman. You got to talk to this woman. So I contacted her and she agreed. So we're going to have a conversation. So thank you so much for
Yes.
being here.
Thanks for inviting me and having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. So basically, for those who don't watch my channel much, I'm a pastor and I help people tell their stories. And that's what we do on my channel mostly. So why don't we begin with the house you grew up with and church life in the house you grew up with.
Okay, so I grew up in a home with a single parent, my mom, and we grew up in South LA. There was not a lot of church life. My grandmother used to take me to church when I was small, so I would say between like 1 to 8 years old, maybe 9 years old. She was sick the last few years of her life and passed away when I was about 13. And so from 1 to 9 or so, I would go to church here and there with her. But like my mom didn't take us to church or anything like that. I think she went to church with us like on special occasions or, at my grandmother's request. And I grew up in Los Angeles. So I grew up in South LA. I spent the first 15, 16 years of my life in South LA before we moved to a suburb of Los Angeles called North Hollywood. But I grew up in a time where hip hop music was big and the riots happened. So this is like the mid 90s. And let's see, when the riots happened, it happened on my street. Like I could stand outside and like literally watch the police cars and
These
just
were
a
the
few
Rodney
blocks
King
from
riots?
the Rodney King riots, the 92 riots. I was just a couple blocks from where Reginald Denny was beaten. I went to school there. I did like all of my primary schooling there. And yeah, when we moved to North Hollywood, it was a bit of a different feel, a different vibe, but still not as low income of an area, but we weren't living like in Beverly Hills or anything like that. So, and still with my single mom, and she did remarry and I had a stepfather, and that relationship wasn't the best, I'll say that, and be gracious to both of them. But it wasn't the best, and it ended up in divorce, but it did end up in the result of me having 2 other sisters. And so I have sisters that I'm quite a bit older than, like 14 years older than. And so yeah, but by and large, I grew up with a single mom who really strong and firm, and I think created in me a strength, a fighting spirit, which I definitely appreciate and love. But yeah, that's a bit about my formative years.
What were your early memories of church? What was that like for you? Now, it sounds like your grandmother was very committed churchgoer, and as we've seen over the last 70 years, there's been a decline in church attendance in America. And so your mother wasn't committed to the church as your grandmother was. What was that like for you as a child?
I didn't really know much about what we were doing. You get to church and it was a storefront church. Maybe 20 people, I feel like, on a gracious day, an all black church. The kids would play, outside or have Sunday school and things like that. But then when you were in church, there was no talking. Like you couldn't do anything. You didn't have gum. You didn't have anything. It was like ushers with the white gloves and like the loud singing and things like that, and people screaming and crying. It was church. It was the only thing I knew, and I just knew that this is what happened. It was not anything, I guess, that I tried to figure out. It was just that this is the way they did it. I didn't know necessarily like, who I was praying to, what this relationship was or anything like that until, I was probably, about 16 in North Hollywood and was invited to go to a youth group.
Okay.
And then I went to a church that the youth group was very mixed race because they pulled from the high schools. The church, however, on a Sunday morning was all white. And so there
Okay.
was this kind of breakdown. But, you know, even just being a part of that church opened up a whole new world for me. I didn't understand what was happening. It was so different than the church that I had, you know, been in all those years ago. But it really helped to, you know, give me a foundation for prayer. You know, the relationships I built there with like people who mentored me and really loved on me, taught me about prayer and the importance of prayer and how to have a relationship with God. And so
Okay.
I have two very vastly different experiences with church.
Yeah, but it also means you do know both churches.
Yes.
Did your grandmother, was your grandmother from LA, or did she come from the deep South?
She came from Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And was she born and raised in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Why did she come out to California? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I
That
don't
would
know.
be interesting to find out.
Yeah, I know that she and my mom came out when she was 2. When my
When
mom
your
was 2.
mom was 2.
When my
Okay.
mom was 2, yeah.
Because it's very interesting to me. I'm basically got my undergraduate degree in history, and so I love history, and I often promote books on my channel, which nobody compensates me for. But you Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, I read this, and because of course my father had this little church in Paterson, New Jersey, with mostly black folks, and I read this book, and it was like the black and white pictures of my youth became just full of color, because I better understood the people in Paterson. And in fact, I did a funeral for a friend of mine in this church for his mother, who she died in LA, and my friend lives and works in LA now. But one of the migration stories in this book was to LA, and it was incredible because the funeral I did, all of the events in this book were in my friend's mother's life. And I think my friend's mother's probably about the generation of your grandmother. So I'm very curious about people's migration stories to California, and especially the fact that she went to a storefront church, a black church with the white gloves. I mean, all of those traditions were historically part of the black church. And so that history just fascinates me. And so then now in you've got some of that DNA from that church. And then you go to a youth church, which is a white church, but a mixed race youth ministry. And then that now as a 16-year-old, obviously as a 16-year-old, you're much better capable of capturing the ideas. What was your mother's opinion of your participation in the youth group? Was she okay with that?
Not originally.
Okay.
I remember her telling me, like, you know, white people like to hug, don't let them hug you. But she was very but it's true. You go to a white church and they will hug you. And, you know, you can get a lot of hugs, right? Even before you get to the building. You got the person, you know, in the parking lot greeter, God bless you. And you got the person at the door. Before you get to your seat, you got like 3 hugs. You know, it's real.
So were you invited to that youth group by a friend?
I was invited to the youth group by a really close friend of mine from school, and she had been going and was like, "Hey, do you want to come?" And I was like, "Sure." You know, sure. Now she presented it like it was some kind of teen club, and this was back in the Valley when teen clubs were a thing. I was like, "Sure." And I show up, and it's a church, and I was like, "Why are we at church?" It was good. Her name was Tracy. That was all. She was a really good friend, and she knew I needed me a little Jesus.
Okay. So you go to the youth group, and that's a youth group. Sometimes do a little bait and switch there. It's like we got fun, but then there's Jesus. So what was was that sort, do you look at that period of your life as a conversion experience for you?
I think it was a time where I became definitely aware of God.
Okay.
And, I did like start my relationship with the Lord, at that time around probably 16, 17. I went for a while just to check it out and check out the people and see what was going on. But I guess you can call it a conversion time. I would say that that's the time where, I definitely committed my life to the Lord and to serving him. And, but I feel like you go and, you can have many moments where you understand like a new aspect of the Lord. And it's like, oh, wow. Like, so I don't know about the conversion story, but
okay.
Where I committed my life to the Lord. Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, because you had gone to church as a little girl, your grandmother was a Christian, your mother didn't stop your grandmother taking you to church. The white people and the hugging, some white church hugs, the church, in the churches I grew up in, it was the black folks who hugged more than the white folks. And oh yeah. Because the Christian Reformed people, sometimes they call them the frozen chosen because they don't want to show any emotion. That's
hilarious.
But anyway, so what about, I mean, do you remember because it's one thing to go to a group and it's a youth group and there's going to be fun and you're going with your friends and you're going to, do all the kind of things that youth group do. What about the mess? I mean, what sort of made you decide that you wanted to take this moment to commit your life to Christ? What was in that for you?
I think it was the idea of father, of like God as father, as somebody who knew me, who loved me, that I could have a relationship with, that would never leave. I didn't mention this, but I grew up in a single parent home, but I didn't really know my father. And then he died when I was 12. And so with that, there was just I think a void of conversation, even about what the father should be and what the possibility is for the role of father in the family. The idea that there could be unconditional love, I'm my heart is to be very gracious toward my mother and my stepfather. And so I don't want to go into their details, but their details are rough, and okay. So this idea of unconditional love in a home, while I knew my mom loved me, it was still a very rough relationship. And so even the idea of, like in Corinthians where it says that, the old has passed away, all things have become new. Like you're a new creation, not all things have passed away, though, but that in Christ you're a new creation. Sorry, wrong verse. But it was the idea that I can be a new creation. Like I don't have to be what I see. I don't have to turn into that. So with that, like there were just different verses that we would memorize in youth group, and the way that they presented it to us was fun. So I wanted to learn scripture. And I would go home and then ponder these things and like think about like, okay, so what does this mean? I remember in one time in youth group, we were in the book of John, but I didn't know John from Jeremiah. So I went home and read the book of Jeremiah. And I got back to church and was like, what is this? But I mean, that was, it's real.
Yeah.
But that was the beginning of my walk with the Lord and understanding. And because I remember that was the night that I committed my life to the Lord. The idea that he knew me and formed me in my mother's womb, he knew me, and like, wow, what does that mean that he knew me? I think that like in the book of Jeremiah is probably my favorite book in the Bible. I just held it close. The idea of a God who knows you, who formed me, who would tell me not to be hesitant because of my age or, things like that, or because of my speech, these are the things that I was very nervous about as a young child or as a teenager, because I've always had a big mouth. And so, people, why you got to say that? Or, in my home, well, you need to watch your mouth. Well, but I'm speaking some truth here too. So yeah, Jeremiah has always just been a place of refuge for me.
Wow.
Even from, being 16, 17.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So did you started going to youth group. Did you start going to church then? Were you baptized at that point? No.
No. I started going to church. I feel like later on, we ended up doing like contests in youth group, because I think what was happening was that the youth were only coming to Wednesday, but never coming to Sunday service. And
Okay.
so they divided us on the teams, and we're like, the team with the most people in church on a Sunday will win like something or whatever. You know how they can get us. And so I came to church on that Sunday, and lo and behold, like it was a huge, the church held 12 to 1,400 people, something like that.
Big
and
church.
like balcony and everything. And I get in, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I've never been in a building this big. The youth had their own like wing and building. And so that was all I was used to. And there were looks, and people were like, what in the world is going on? And why are there so many kids here, basically? And we were a disruption. We were, even though the church was affluent, we were hood kids. They playing a praise and worship song, and we gonna start to clap and dance, and everybody's like, what in the world? Because they hadn't been moving, And so now we are bringing in a different culture and a different thought about how worship can be.
Yeah.
And now you see like the rise of Kirk Franklin coming to be. And so while we would play this music up in our youth group, now we're like, hey, can we have this song? And people lost their minds.
Yeah.
We cannot play anything aside from, whatever it was that they were already playing.
Yeah.
But my youth pastor then was promoted to senior pastor, and he was younger. He was in his 40s when he was promoted. Okay. And he really took a stand and said, no, we are going to have an intergenerational church. And we would have some of that music, and people left.
Yeah.
I remember walking down the court, there's a corridor at this church, and two elderly women like grabbing their bags and clutching it to themselves when I walked by. And I was like, I don't want your purse. I'm just coming for a little music and Jesus, maybe some peace after,
Yeah.
But this is the thought of that older generation that we shouldn't necessarily mix. We're okay with our, the congregation that we have. We don't need any new music. And I can honestly say that my pastor's heart wasn't to get rid of anyone.
Yeah.
But it definitely was to make sure that, as young people, we would be involved and that there would be space for us.
Yeah.
Which I appreciated.
Yeah. So you did that in high school. Did you, what was after high school for you?
I dropped out of high school. I actually dropped out in the last grade I successfully completed is probably grade 9. Okay. Grade 10 was basically a wash, and they wanted me to redo grade 10. But I knew the material. It wasn't that I didn't know the material, it was that I didn't go. And so because of my absences and things like that, they wanted me to redo this grade. And I said, no. I was just like, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to have to redo something that I already know. And so I ended up dropping out, and I ended up working, caring for my 2 sisters a bit. And then, I don't know, I went on a women's retreat, and
from the church?
The church, the women of the church, invited some of the younger people, so us, to attend this women's retreat. And this had to be like, gosh, I was probably like 19 by now, maybe 20. So it had been some time after I dropped out and was working. And the speaker at the retreat was like, you guys should check out Biola University. Like, I work there. You guys would be such a huge asset there. And I was like, sure, so I go on a tour and, all of this. Now, I have no idea how any of this stuff works. No one had sat me down and talked to me about going to university. This is what you need to do. or anything like that. And so I figured out like, okay, I started to ask some questions. What do I need to do to get my high school equivalency and all that? And they wanted me to take this class. And I was like, oh Lord, I cannot even, I didn't have time because I was working full time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just didn't really have patience for it. And so I just went in and signed up and took the test and passed. And so with that, then I went to a junior college and spent a year there. And then I went to Biola.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. So what did you study at junior college and then Biola?
So I only did my GEs, my general eds.
Okay.
At the undergrad. And I only did it for a year. I needed 27 units to be able to transfer in successfully to Biola. And so I took 27 units.
Okay.
I went winter, spring, fall, and summer and was able to complete those classes. And then I transferred in.
Now, were you going to
school I applied to?
Were you going to church at that time?
Oh yeah,
never
stopped going to church. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was at that church basically until I moved to South Africa in 2014.
Okay. So even though your first experiences as a member of the youth ministry in the church were pretty arresting, with the youth pastor becoming the senior pastor, the transformations in that church, the church became something that became your home.
Yeah, I mean, I eventually after Biola went back, completed an internship with that church, and became on staff as their children's ministry coordinator.
Really? Wow.
And oversaw all of their children's ministries.
How did the church change then with the youth pastor becoming the senior pastor? Did the church get more integrated, or still pretty much a white church?
No, I think it became a pretty integrated church. I think it was pretty diverse in socioeconomic status, diverse racially, ethnically. I feel like it changed a lot. Yeah, I don't know.
Go ahead. Well,
no,
did the neighborhood change at the same time? Was the church basically responding to the changes in the neighborhood?
No, I feel like when we moved there, the neighborhood was pretty diverse, and actually probably more Hispanic than anything, Hispanic Armenian. And so it wasn't that I feel like it was responding to the changes in the neighborhood. I think what was happening was that many of the people were driving in. So you're driving in from Santa Clarita, you're driving in from Burbank, from Northridge, Toluca Lake, all of these areas, some suburbs, some subsets of North Hollywood. But then as people disagreed with the pastor, then they just, went back and stayed or changed churches or whatever.
Yeah. Did your mother move because of the riots, or was she just looking for a better situation for you?
It was both.
Okay.
So we ended up moving like a couple of days after the riots started, once we were given, because we were kind of put on curfew and things like that. Mm-hmm. But she had already found a home for us to move into, it was now put off because I think the day we were supposed to move was the first day of the riots, something like that. And so as soon as we got clearance to be able to go past like the certain line or, whatever it was, then we just took a couple things and moved, and then came back, after things had settled down, and moved everything else. But yeah, it was a little bit of both.
Okay. So let's talk about your trip to South Africa. What brought that on, and what was that like?
Oh my gosh, I love South Africa. So in 2009, yes, I was invited to participate on a trip to South Africa, and I have always wanted to work in inner cities. So inner cities in America. I love America. I was just like, this is my home. I don't want to go to South Africa. No, thank you. And then after praying, I felt like the Lord was saying, no, this is something that I have for you. I want you to go. So January 2010, I go on a trip, And I was like, wow, like this is completely different than anything I thought. Great trip. On that trip in prayer, I felt like the Lord was telling me like that I was going to come back the same year and that I would move there. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So when like I flew out like on a Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. And the day before I had been laid off and I was running, I was overseeing a nonprofit. And so I literally locked the door, turned in the keys, and then the next day flew to South Africa. So my life is completely changed. And I'm like, there's no way I'm coming back. I don't have no money to go back to South Africa. You know how much money this is? I can't. So let's see, that's January. I get home February. And gosh, around August, I receive a call from a doctor who was on the trip. She's a psychologist. And she asked me if I would be willing to go back with her in October to help teach people who work in foster care and in group homes how to train children in social skills, or how to train these people to work with the children so that the children develop social skills. Because what they were finding was that children were being returned to the agency because they lacked these skills. So they weren't washing their hands. They were, like swearing and screaming and, just had attitude or things like that. And so I was like, I'm not sure. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to have the money for it. And she was like, well, we'll fundraise. And in 2-3 weeks, we had $3,000, and here I am now in October, and I'm back in South Africa. And I was like, well, if the same voice told me that I was gonna come back the same year, then I believe that it's the same voice that told me I'm gonna move here. But it didn't happen immediately. It wasn't until 2014. I didn't go to South Africa in 2011. I went in 2012 and in 2013. And in 2013, when I was on the plane, it was just so confirmed in my heart, like, you need to move here. Like when you praying on the plane before it takes off, like, Lord, don't let us crash. That I was doing that prayer. And he was like, don't worry about the crash. You need to move here. And I was like, well, I'm praying about the crash. Can you just hold us up? Because that's a long flight. That's a lot of water. And so I get home from that trip and I talked to the organization that I had been going with. And they were just like, yes, like we completely believe in this vision. I wanted to go and teach dance for a year and do work with like dance therapy. And 9 months later, I was on the ground full time in South Africa.
Wow.
Right outside of Cape Town in Stellenbosch. There's a township in Stellenbosch. And it's called Kayamandi. And I was doing work in Kayamandi, teaching dance to kids and then doing like life skills with women. And then pretty soon after I moved there, the Lord had me go into a colored community in Cape Town called the Cape Flats. And I eventually transitioned out of Kayamandi into the Cape Flats, an area called Lotus River. And I worked there for 4 years. And not just doing like dance therapy. Actually, dance was very little of it. It was more like traditional one-on-one, with a youth or a teacher, and had students come over from Azusa Pacific University where they would intern. I would have students from, schools there on the ground, all volunteer led, and really just worked with children who had been impacted by trauma.
Mm. Well, was LA the only place, the LA area, the only place you had lived in the United States?
Yes, it was the only place I had lived in the United States.
So,
go ahead.
So big change when you went to South Africa.
Big change. I was the only one. I was the only American a lot of times. Now, I did find other Americans and was able to work with a few other Americans, but the thought process was different. The way that people viewed America was different. Here I am. I'm coming from America. I love America. I think America is great. Why don't you? So, I learned a lot of things really quickly.
What did you learn? What did you learn about race? Because race, obviously, in the history of South Africa, has been a very big deal. Apartheid, that whole history. When I was in college, my father was involved in the, the divestment movement. That was a big deal when I was in college. I remember when I was a boy, my father had a minister from South Africa or a leader from South Africa stay at our home with us for a little while. And so, I mean, growing up, because part of the Dutch, so the Afrikaners, they were from the Dutch, and so you have the Dutch Reformed, and so that was a big deal in my denomination because we were American Dutch Reformed, and that was the Afrikaner Dutch Reformed. What did you learn about the particular, let me say it this way, the particular manifestation of racism in South Africa, and how then did that impact your view of the racism that, you know, you told the story about the woman clutching her purse. Because, I mean, obviously with the Rodney King riots, I mean, race was something that you obviously you can't avoid it. Growing up how you did, especially with, you know, more of the elements of the story now we have from you. What did you learn in South Africa about race?
Well, they were just coming out of apartheid. I mean, 22, I think when I moved there, apartheid had been done for 22, 23 years. I think now they're probably on year 26, 27, 28 maybe. So people were still pretty clear, you know, that, you know, racism is wrong. We don't want to be racist. And yet whites live here, blacks live here, coloreds live here, you know.
Which people didn't want to be racist, at least publicly?
I think publicly, no one wanted to be racist.
Okay.
I think that it was kind of like in LA, you know, when I was growing up, we would have certain comments. Well, you know, that's how white people are. We didn't want to be, we weren't racist. We were just telling the truth. Yeah, you know what I mean?
White people are a certain way often. But everybody's got to be something.
Everybody is a little bit of a certain way. You know, and so what I saw was, you know, it wasn't that people wanted to be racist or have this, you know, heart of racism, but I think there was just a lot of carryover. People weren't, yeah, at that time, people weren't so divorced from these ideas, you know? So when you look at like schooling, you know, you have Black schools and Black children going to school in the township. You have colored communities and colored kids going to school here. And then you have white schools, and which are now called, I think, Model C schools. And even though there's been integration and students can come and attend white schools now, which are definitely the better schools, there's still a lot of hiccups and issues with getting kids into schools. And so, you know, they would say, well, we're open, you know, we're not being racist, but then there's a whole mountain of issues in order to get a child into a school that would be a better school. But I think it happens on all sides, and it's just because this is the only thing that we've really known there, you know, the only thing that they've known. And so you have these different forms of conversation. Just a couple years ago, there was a whole issue with the universities and like translation. So the University of Stellenbosch is an Afrikaans speaking school, and I'm not sure if that's changed, but at that time it was. And so some students who didn't speak Afrikaans needed to have headsets and have translation and things like that for some classes. And there was like issues with, well, they didn't say this in my headset, you know, whatever the professor's saying didn't get translated into the headset. The difference is with how Black students were treated versus colored students versus white students. I think that, you know, America would complain about issues of racism, but I think in South Africa, it was just so real. It was tangible. Like, I can see it. It's not like, you're not moving into this neighborhood, you know, and it's not redlining. It's not, you know, anything. It's just, you're not, like, you know. Now, America, I think by and large, we've done well to take those things off of paper. And so we have to deal with the heart issue. In South Africa, I feel like it's just a known reality. Like, this is just, you know, if you live in Paradise Kloof, this is a white area. Or if you live in Dazalza, that's a white area. And that doesn't mean that Black people can't move in. But traditionally, I feel like Black people live with Black people and colored people live with colored people. And, you know. And you also see sprinkled throughout, places where that isn't necessarily true. Nothing's 100%.
Right. Maybe you should explain. I know what you're talking about, but I would imagine some in our audience won't know what you mean by using the word colored in the context of South Africa, because that was present 20, 30 years ago, more in American media today. A lot of folks don't know, why is she using that word colored? I thought that was on water fountains in the South in 1945.
Yes.
Better
Yes, I
explain that.
remember when I got there, because in South Africa, I wouldn't be considered Black.
Right.
I wouldn't be considered colored either. And I'm not white, but I think by and large, I just fit more within the colored community. But colored is the group of people that basically sprang up. Well, gosh, depends on what history you're looking at and all that. There was the Khoisan, and so they are a people group that traditionally hold and look more colored. So they're not Black African. They don't, when we say Black African, it's like this blood has not been, touched or watered down or anything like that. They have all of the African tradition. And then you have whites who are white. They, because of the rape and pillage of the country from basically everyone, there are Dutch people there are English people there are Scots there, that you get white people with different lineages that tie back, to many places in Europe. And then you have the colored community. And what I can see is that, yes, there are the Khoisan who lived in, and gosh, I want to say it's in the Northern Cape, maybe, of South Africa. But then you also have a people group that were the offspring of slavery because of the rape and pillage of the country. And so the white slave owners sleeping with the Black African women, creating a mixed race people. And they are known as the colored people or the colored community. And I would say those are the three major ones. Indian is also very prevalent in South Africa. But I think all the groups there, and there are tons, like there are 11 official languages in South Africa. Yeah. But those four groups are very beautiful. The colored, Black, white, and Indian, they're beautiful, and they have their own traditions and
their own cultures.
Yeah.
Now, what was church life like in South Africa that you could see and whatever you participated in? Because I know as a foreign missionary because I was a foreign missionary for a number of years, when you leave your church and you go to another culture, especially as you described, if you're alone, I mean, going to a church in another culture that can go a lot of different ways. So what was like for you in that period of your life?
It was like stepping into a church in America. I was so surprised. So a lot of Cape Town, I would say even a lot of South Africa, models itself after America. Huh. And so there were many things that were the same, but a little different. And so going to the church that I went to, it was a larger church. It had, many campuses and things like that. And they played Hillsong. They played, just regular contemporary music that I would have sung back home. Now, they might have had an accent or, things like that. And every once in a while, they would sing a song in Afrikaans or they would sing a song in Xhosa or something like that. But by and large, they spoke English. I think they got pushbacks for having so much English that, they then had an offshoot service that was completely Afrikaans. But yeah, like it was, I didn't feel, aside from being the American, I didn't really feel out of place, and people were extremely welcoming. And usually, like if I was with a group of colored people, or even if I was in a group of white people, you wouldn't be able to tell that I wasn't colored. We just look alike. And so, people would walk up to me speaking Afrikaans because they're colored Afrikaans speaking and not realize, and then I'm like, hi, or I'll say something back in Afrikaans and I'll have my American accent with it and you get the look. you know? But it was definitely like some of the best years. Yeah. Like
Wow.
ever. It
How
was
many
good
years
for
were you in South Africa?
4 years, 3 months.
4 years, 3 months. Wow. What an experience. Why did you
Definitely.
leave?
Well, since you asked, a death threat was made against me and it was credible. And so I had to come home.
Someone
Yeah.
didn't like the work you were doing?
Someone didn't like the work I was doing. So I had been attacked. Let's see. I came home in 2018 and I came home, I came home June of 2018. And so that Christmas before, I was home, and then I went back late January, early February. And while February 9th, while I was in my apartment with my lights on, mind you, at like midnight, people tried to break into my apartment. And so we don't know, the police speculate that it could have been related to the death threat, but we're not sure because the people got away. And so there was that. And then that was February. And then in April, May, a death threat was made against me regarding a child that I was involved with having her removed from her home due to abuse.
Oh.
But her father, who was the perpetrator, was a known gang leader. And so there was that. When I came home to surprise my nephew for his graduation, and literally came home with like a carry-on suitcase and found out that, hey, I'm not going to be able to go back. And so
Wow. That's
that
heartbreaking.
yeah, it really was. It was very rough. It was a rough season, just of like, God, what are you doing? How does this work? I came back to a very different America than what I had left, even though, I had come home every year for the holidays to be with my family and to like see friends and fundraise. I was still very unaware of what was happening here. I don't really watch TV at all, and I hadn't for years before I moved. And so even though, there would be conversations, it wasn't really anything that informed me on the hostility of everything that was happening here. So I was kind of shocked when I was here and like here, permanently here, to see what was happening.
Well, there's so many interesting questions I have for your story, but so you're talking about the changes. I mean, because that's a dynamic. When I left the United States in 1990 and I came back in 97. And so when you're gone for a number of years, the thing is, when you live overseas, you see your own country in a different way because you've internalized a bunch of the other culture. And when you live overseas, there's not only there's the variety of cultures you're dealing with, because many places in the world are multicultural and multi-ethnic now. So like when I was in the Dominican Republic, there was Dominican culture and there was Haitian culture, but there's also class with respect to these cultures. So to be poor Dominican was different than to be wealthy elite Dominican who's always going to the United States. And most of the Haitians I worked with were cane cutters and coffee pickers, so they were almost all poor. But so dynamic environment like South Africa with all of these moving parts, and then quite clearly you're getting involved in family relations. So, I mean, yeah, there's that stuff is always volatile. But then you come back to the United States and you realize, wow, stuff has happened in these 4 years. Well, first of all, how did South Africa change your view of the United States?
I really became aware of the idea of how self-focused we can be. There's so much of history that I was unaware of that, even when I would talk with other Americans, they were like, what? Like, how do you know that? Or, no, I didn't know that either. Things like that. And I feel like in South Africa, they teach history and they give so much more information. Now, maybe it was just because I, didn't complete high school or things like that, or maybe, the schools that I was in. But even now, in talking with high school students and looking at the history that they're learning, it's more of an American focused history, or our participation in other events in the world, as opposed to a world history and how other countries influenced ideas in the world. And so I think that's one of the things that I really developed an appreciation for, is this idea of history, and how we should have a history that's more full.
Mm, mm, mm.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the things that I really took away, is that, you know, as Americans, we can be very self-focused. We can be very, you know, nation-focused. People, they always asked, why do you have a World Series and yet only Americans play in it? And now at this point, I was like, I don't even know what the World Series is. What are you talking about? I don't follow sports. And people thought that I was really crazy not to understand what the World Series was. But when I did finally figure it out, I asked my friends, and they were like, well, they have players from all over the world. It's baseball. So they were like, you know, they have players from all over the world, but no, by and large, it's just the American teams. That to me was a clear indication of just how we can be very, you know, us focused, nation focused, because they do play baseball in other parts of, they play baseball in South Africa. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So you talked about, you came back and things were different. What did you notice?
My gosh, people were mean. I was just like, why is everyone being so angry and so mean? I remember in it must have been 2016, when President Trump was, when he won the votes, and I was sitting on a plane in Ghana, and the announcement came over the loudspeaker who the new president was, and people like literally fell out of their chairs. They were screaming, there was crying. It was a mess. And so, but I didn't realize that there was riots here. I didn't realize that, you know, how angry people were. Sure, I saw things in the news that were like, this is a poor decision. But then I saw things, you know, in the news that were like, this is going to be a great decision. My social media feed was pretty balanced, with like, he's horrible to praise God, he's going to be a godsend for our country. I don't know that I had strong feelings about it either way, because I was in South Africa and I had no plan on coming home. When I got here, and I really started to pay attention to what was happening, what my social media feed was, like, I feel like it, and maybe I just wasn't paying attention in South Africa, but it really became a thing of people just saying whatever. Like, they didn't care if they hurt people's feelings. The ideas of like my truth, you know, my voice, my truth, my experience. So you should be believing my experience as a person of color, you know, was really big. And the things that we only talked about around the table at home, or around the table at my friends' houses, or my mom's friends' houses, things that I would overhear as a child, you know, white people always want to keep us down, or, you know, they think they can do us any kind of way. This was now people's posts on Facebook. It wasn't like a sidebar conversation. And so, what I recognized is that a lot of the frameworks, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but a lot of the frameworks that I had held personally, and even learned in school, and I would say had advocated for, were now just here. Everyone was talking about them. And so I think that, to me, that was the biggest change. The biggest change was just the anger, you know, the words that were being spit out to people from behind people's computer screens that were doing so much damage. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that I saw.
Well, I like how you framed it in terms of, I mean, these were things that were talked about, you know, sort of in private spaces you were growing up with, and now they're out on social media. I mean, when people say that white people are trying to keep us down, they're not being dishonest, are they?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define your terms.
Oh, well, say more about that, because I mean, I I agree, and I completely understand how you just framed it. But one of the things that just in our conversation now I can see is what you said before about you are a person who speaks your mind, and you are going to, because I would imagine some people wouldn't like what you're saying in this way, but to me it sounds very honest. So I mean, because there's in a sense two narratives, and one narrative is that, you know, and these narratives are projected to be self-exclusive, that, okay, so, you know, white people are always trying to keep us down. Now it's time for us to, you know, we're not going to take it anymore. We're done with all of that, and you know, no more. And so, okay. And the other is, well, is that true? And I think people have a difficulty saying yes and no. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that when you look on paper, a lot of, you know, or most of the systems that were in place to keep people of color down have been like rectified. Like, we've passed laws to be able to ensure fair education, to ensure equal access to housing, to employment. Like, there have been things that have been fought for and overturned. And so in 2020, when I am looking and people are saying, you know, well, the white man's just trying to keep us down, I want to say, well, which one? Because are you speaking about a system? And this is the whole thing, you know, people are talking about this idea of systems. Well, sure, there can be, you know, there can be systems in place. I'm not going to say that every system is perfect, but by and large, these systems have been overturned so that there is equality or equality of access to be able to enter into certain things. Now, if you're talking about an individual, sure, I can say, you know, dear John over here, or, you know, Mr. X, Y, and Z has a racist heart. He holds partiality in his heart. And so, yeah, we might not want to, you know, utilize his services. Don't go to him as your lawyer, because it's not going to work out, you know, or don't go to this grocery store. They're going to charge you too much, you know. But I don't know that I can say that we have all of these systems. What I hear a lot of is this, term like systemic racism and systemic oppression and things like that. And while, yes, if we want to look back in our history, we can say we have had some issues with systemic oppression. I can attest, you know, like, I can look back and say that. Today, I would say we have issues with the human heart. And so how do we legislate the human heart? I don't know that there's a law that we can put into practice to say this is going to rectify the issues of the human heart. Now, whenever there's a system, there's going to be an issue, because systems are made of people. And so if the system has now been rewritten, all the laws are passed, everything's great, but then we hire, you know, Henry, and he has some bias in his heart, even if he is unaware of his bias, and participates in a way that exudes partiality to one group. It could be he exudes partiality to white men, you know, so we're not going to have white men up in here. So, you know, there's still a problem, but we want to blame the system, when in reality, what we cannot get away from is the wickedness of human heart.
Well, that's in America, if we talk about, we also, again, we have these other competing narratives. We have one narrative that says people are good. People are basically good. And if you're on the street and you drop your purse, and, you know, somebody bends to pick it up, we can say, oh, that's the milk of human kindness. That's, you know, people are basically good. And then you're saying human hearts are bad. I mean, how does that work? And because I mean, one of the things that's happening within the race conversation is that, one of the things that I often say is that there are in many ways three competing views of racism. One is, let's say, a bias of the heart. One is our ideas about racial aspects and characteristics bleeding into other aspects of life would be like white people like to hug. It's a generalization, basically. It's not an evil thing, but you know, white people like to hug. Well, all people like to hug, but you know, you go to one of these white churches like the one you went to, the white folks like to hug. And so maybe the group you grew up in isn't as huggy as these people, and you're not really into letting strangers into your personal zone, but for some reason, just entering the parking lot suddenly means the rules change, and these white people are going to be all over you in your personal business. What's with that? So, you know, that's that second kind. And then the third kind is that there are these inequities that we discover in the world, and there might be a history to it that has led to these inequities, and there might be a racial aspect to it that has led to these inequities. And so we can say, well, if you look at, let's say, accumulated wealth in the United States, and if you categorize people by race, you can say white people have this much wealth, and you know, black people have this much wealth, and so therefore there's systemic racism because this is perpetuating over history. So I mean, and this is something that people just have this one word racism, and then they mean these different things. And what happens is often the definitions sort of move around underneath, because someone could look at baseball in 1930 and say, that's structural racism. And it was, because if you were black, you didn't play baseball no matter how well you played. In Paterson, New Jersey, where I grew up, we had Hinchcliffe Stadium, which was one of the traditional black stadiums where the Negro League played. And of course now, you know, today, well, if you look at the racial makeup of the Major League Baseball, who continues to have the World Series, and you look at the racial makeup, most people look at that and they don't look at that and say, well, that's structural racism, partly because there's Dominicans are way overrepresented. There's a lot of black folks. There's also some white folks. But you look at the NBA and you say, whoa, there's a lot of black folks. And then all these Eastern Europeans, it's like, how did they get in there in such large numbers? And so, but then we use this racism as a word that accounts for the inequities we see in the world. And it's really nice to have one idea that can sort of explain lots of different things. And sometimes it's true, but, and so I think that's just a brief, you know, look at some of my take on the current conversation. It sounds like when you got back from South Africa and you saw all this anger, I mean, because one of the things that's clear from your story, and this is why I go into people's stories in a pretty detailed way, you had been living and working and enjoying community in a very multi-ethnic context. You had white friends, you had black friends, you had colored friends in South Africa, you had learned some Afrikaans. You, by this point, are a very cosmopolitan person.
There's that. Never called myself cosmopolitan, but I guess I'll take it today. I never really thought about it like that.
You're a long ways from that little girl who grew up in LA. You've been around the world. And when you worked in South Africa, I would imagine you're dealing with socialization to the point that someone wanted you gone. I mean, you're deep in people's business and culture, and you know, when I grew up in Paterson, there were kids that I knew that never went more than 4 or 5 blocks away from their house. Mm-hmm. And LA is a tremendously dynamic place. You went to Biola University. You were part of a church that for a while was mostly white, but the youth group was integrated, and then the church became more integrated. You saw, I mean, you were right there on the front line of these riots. You moved to a different neighborhood. Then you went to South Africa, where the racial mixture is completely different, but a very serious and racist and bloody history, very serious stuff. So
Yeah.
you came back to America as someone with, you had learned a ton about this world and about human nature.
I had, or at least I thought I had.
Okay.
You know, I wasn't aware of the things that I still held and how horribly racist some of those things that I even held on to were. You know, like when we talk about things like systemic racism, I was a huge proponent of the idea that everything was systemic injustice, everything. You know, if I didn't
where did you get that idea?
I just think that a lot of it was, again, the conversations that were had growing up, and then going to school. I studied sociology, and that just kind of put all the pieces together. You know, I think if you have a box, like a puzzle box, you know, growing up, I was given the box of puzzles. Going to university, they told me, okay, this piece goes here, and this is how this fits together, and this is why you need to speak out for marginalized and oppressed people. This is why you should, you know, read these books. This is how Black people or brown people are continuing to be oppressed today. These are the things that are wrong within America. This is why, you know, you have a white church or a Black church. And there was a ton of things that happened in university for me that helped put the pieces together. So then by the time I'm leaving university now, I have a different narrative in my head of like, what does this look like? What is my role in society? So I go into social service from this viewpoint of, you know, how do I help change the culture so that Black and brown people are not just on the fringes, are not living in poverty? Because again, when I had the puzzle in its pieces, it was that white people will always do us like this. We will always be on these fringes. Going to Biola helped put the pieces together. So now I at least had some idea of what is it that's being done to keep Black and brown people down. Now, I will say this is that, you know, the pieces that were being put together through a critical race theory lens. And so I had terms and ideas and a framework all through this critical race theory framework. And coming home, I noticed the anger and all of that. And I started to have conversations with everyone, Black and white, together, like, what is going on? What is the problem? And that's when I feel like in those conversations and in conversations with Holy Spirit that I needed to repent. I had a poor framework. My puzzle was put together very poorly, and like my terms weren't defined appropriately. I didn't have a proper vision or a proper understanding of Scripture and God's vision for unity. And so, yeah, I think I'm saying a lot. I know I'm probably going way down the road, but
that's okay.
Yes, I had a framework for something, but a lot of that needed to be revisited once I got home.
Now, you're saying that you learned critical race theory at Biola.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And Biola stands for?
The Bible Institute of Los Angeles.
So you learned critical race theory at the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. And from what I understand you've been doing since you got back is you've been deconstructing the critical race theory that you learned at a Christian university.
Yeah. What was hard, or not even, I won't even start there. I'll say what was so appealing is the idea that, you know, I grew up in an area that was predominantly Black and Latino. Everyone was, you know, struggling and things like that. I get to Biola and people are affirming, you know, the fact that Jesus is good, he's real, and he is for the Black and the brown person. And, you know, you see things that happened at school and it was just you know, things among like white teachers or other white students. And it's, well, you know, this is just the way they are. You have to keep speaking into it or they'll never understand. And so, you know, it doesn't matter if you say something or not, they're not going to understand. And so it was always, even in university, it felt like this pit, Black against white. And, you know, what do you do with that when you're young? What we would do is we would talk with the, you know, the instructors or faculty and staff, and everything was just, I feel like supported, or what we were saying was supported. And the way that they supported that was with this ideology of what I would call today anti-racism. You know, it was, even though they didn't use the term whiteness then, it was definitely a whiteness type of mentality, or a whiteness type of teaching.
It's interesting. I mean, we would have expected that, perhaps we would have expected that this would have been part of your training at UCLA or USC or a state college or a secular university, Occidental, you know, some major school in Southern California. But you learned this at a Christian college, and it was there any was this put together with Christianity in a particular way, or was it just sort of taught as sociology?
No, it was, okay, so it was taught only in my sociology classes. I didn't
Okay.
hear this rhetoric, like in my Bible classes or anything like that. But it was put together through the sociology lens, through that sociological lens of, this is how we should address the world. This is how we fix, you know, things that are wrong when we look at things sociologically.
Okay.
Now, but they baptize it in Jesus and then they send you on your way. And so, you know.
So this was very much, so after Biola, you worked social work. You said you were leading a nonprofit.
Yeah, I was a program manager at a nonprofit, and basically oversaw the Women's Day program and a piece of their shelter and things like that. And so in the end, right before it closed, I was like senior staff before they closed. And so I had the responsibility of like locking it up. But yeah.
But that then helps understand why you did the kind of work you did in South Africa, because you had already had a background in social work. This is what your training was in. And so then when you went to South Africa, the work you did there was in some ways connected with social work. But you did fundraising. So this was also through a church context or through a Christian mission.
It was through a Christian organization. They were a Christian leadership organization.
Okay.
And they would go over once or twice a year to South Africa and do leadership development with different leaders and with students.
Okay.
And so on one of my trips, what I noticed was just a huge disconnect in the kids we were serving. And a huge, I don't know if infiltration is the right word, but there was a huge push toward gangs, violence, to carry guns, to sell drugs. I had fourth graders selling guns, you know, so, you know, how do we reach that generation? How do we reach that child? That was my goal. How do I, you know, get a child who's in, you know, third, fourth, fifth grade to be able to learn? Because a lot of the traumatic impact that they had of the trauma experiences they had, they were experiencing trauma symptoms, and some of them were having difficulty with learning, with reading and things like that. So what do you do? How do you ground a child so that they can learn in the classroom? What do you do when you have multiple children who have some form of PTSD or childhood PTSD in one classroom?
So you had all this sociological training and knowledge and the assumptions of critical race theory when you went to South Africa. What happened to your, maybe it wasn't conscious at that point, but what happened to those assumptions when you hit a radically different context with a very different history from, let's say, what you had grown up with in LA or been taught in Biola?
I think it it moved to the back burner. I think there were some things that were still the same. So, you know, like the people who lived in the more affluent areas were generally all white. And it was quite removed from any colored or Black community, even if it was only a 5-minute drive. You know, so when I'm saying remove, like it's gated community, it's very like, you know, you don't go in here because it could cause trouble for you. It was like they were patrolled. And so there was definitely this sense of removal and a sense of separation, even though it was across the street from a colored community or from a township or something like that. And so I think when I noticed that and when I saw that, it was just like, I don't know if I want to even call it a confirmation, but it was just probably confirmation bias of just, well, you know, white people don't want to live with colored and Black people. White people like to live on their own, you know, and that just confirmed the things that the bias that I already had, because even though I went to church and my church was diverse, there weren't a lot of white people living around me. You know, when I lived in LA, there weren't white people who lived next door to me. And so again, like getting into South Africa, it was just probably confirmation bias of just, you know, well, that's white people because they live over here. But I don't know that it is, I don't today not realize, I don't know that it's a thing of white people don't want to, you know, live by Black or colored people. It could just be the way that the country was set up, and especially set up during apartheid, and how certain people had to live in certain groups. You have the Areas Act in South Africa that definitely split people by race, and people didn't have a choice, even if you weren't racist. You know, you could be a white person who wanted to live in a colored community and you couldn't. Or the idea that when you get into, let's say, colored areas, you have a lot of familial groups. And so now I'm staying with my group, I'm staying with my tribe, and I don't necessarily want to move over here. Yeah, it would be nice to have the big house or, you know, something like that. But at the end of the day, my grandmother lives here, my aunt lives here. And so I don't know if what I was holding on to as a confirmation bias is actually a truth.
So when did the deconstruction of what you were taught in your sociology classes, when did that happen for you?
Ooh, you getting real up into my personal business now. My goodness. Okay, I'm gonna grab my coffee.
You go right ahead. You don't have to say anything you don't want to. There's no coercion here.
Oh, no.
I'm a very curious man. So I just ask what comes to mind.
No, I am happy to share. So get home in 2018. I come home with PTSD, and I moved in with a friend and her family, my friend Krista, and she's a theologian, and we just started having conversations. Now she would probably describe me as being angry, but I didn't think I was angry. I just think that I'm, you know, outspoken and probably say a lot of things. And so
you weren't angry, you were right.
Exactly. And we just got into conversations about race and like things that I was seeing here. And I would just plainly tell her, yeah, I know you think that, but that's just because you're privileged. Like, that's just because of your white privilege. And it's because you hold on to a very white Christianity. Like, Christianity is truly a white man's religion. Now, I was Christian. I don't know if I was making exceptions for myself or like if I had a way of kind of threading out some things. And I think that's more it of like, you know, yeah, white people believe this is white Christianity. They don't like to do this. They don't like to do that. You know, at Biola, I did spend time in my friend's grandfather's church, which was an all-Black church. And so I did come back to that a little bit. But, you know, I would have these conversations quite openly. You know, you and your family are white, and you guys have a privilege that I don't have. Talking like, oh gosh, we would have conversations and we would both get angry. And I would tell her, well, you're only angry because you're fragile. Like, this is white fragility. Like,
so you were really up on this stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You had all the words.
Oh, I had all the words and all the answers.
Okay.
And it was after while I'm having this conversation with her, I'm having another conversation at work with an intern who is like, she's white and she's at another Christian school here. And she's telling me things about all the Black children come to school and, you know, they tell us that we shouldn't speak and that we're wicked and that our skin color is evil. And so now she's crying at work about, you know, her things that are happening. I'm having this conversation over here with Krista. And on the sidelines, I'm having a conversation with the Lord of, can you please let Krista know and her family know that Black people don't have things good here in America, and that we need to be doing this anti-racist work. We should be speaking out about these things. I'm very vocal. Like, I've always been an advocate for the underdog. And so I remember in a conversation with the Lord where I was pretty much, you know, don't yell at Jesus. It's not right. You shouldn't do it. I'm gonna tell you now. And he was so gentle and so kind in my prayer time. But it was just impressed upon my heart that I had to repent for believing social justice. Now, CRT never came up in this. It was just, I needed to repent for believing in social justice. And I remember I nearly fainted.
Because that sounds just wrong. I mean, Jesus
calling out social
justice.
It was wrong. And I didn't know how to tell the Lord, you must be like believing something wrong with Jesus. Like, you know, like, maybe we should go to God the Father, because can we take this, you know? And so I began to just ask, like, what am I repenting from? Like, what is this? And he slowly began to show me areas where places in my heart were racist, where I was holding on to things that weren't true, like systemic racism. And that doesn't mean that there isn't any systemic racism, but everything isn't a systemic injustice. Even if certain people on certain sides of the fence might be saying that it is. Inheritance is not a systemic injustice, although some people would say it is. You know, being done with the white male patriarchy. Well, or looking at issues of hierarchy. Hierarchy is found in the Bible, you know. So how do I hold both of these ideas in both of my hands? Like, on this hand, I'm down with hierarchy. On this hand, I'm like, but I love God. Well, wait a minute, this is a problem. How do I reconcile these? Looking at the idea that white people are really just the oppressor. Well, what does the Lord say? Like, what am I saying about his children? One, and then two, what does he say about his children, and how should I approach and address them? There was a lot, and it started with repenting from social justice, and then digging deep into the framework of critical race theory. I had to first understand my own actions and the things that I personally was holding on to and doing, to be able to look at what was behind them, which was the framework, and look at historically, what has the church believed? Historically, how has the church handled certain situations? And it's been over 2 years. Or just over 2 years, maybe just 2 years now, but it's been a journey. And maybe in November of last year is when the Lord told me that he wanted me to start speaking out about the ills and wrongs of critical race theory, especially within the church. And yeah, that he would just guide me on it, that this is where the Center for Biblical Unity came from. Yeah.
Wow. That takes a lot of, because people, once sides are drawn, people feel duty bound to hate the other side, but they hate a traitor worse.
Yeah, there's that. There is that.
So what does this cost you?
Well, I've stopped posting on my personal social media feed. Yeah, I probably posted something, I think a picture a couple of days ago, but I really don't post anymore. I posted something about Ahmaud Arbery, and it was like 5 things that we could know, like right now. And it was not even everything that everybody could know. It was things that I knew. I knew that, you know, the families were grieving. Both sides had experienced a loss. I knew that, you know, an injustice had taken place not because he was Black and not because they were white, but because if it was true that he was looking to steal, according to biblical law, we don't kill a thief. So there's that. There was a couple other things, but the last thing that I said was I knew that there was more that would come out, that we didn't know everything. And people basically ripped me to shreds on that. Just, you know, how could you think that, all the way to like calling me out my name. And yeah, like, I called one friend, I was in her wedding. I called her after and asked if we could have a conversation. Nothing. You know, so I know that there are people who, you know, have views of who I am or who I used to be and are quite shocked. I did have a bit of a back and forth with another friend who was also in this other friend's wedding. And, you know, cause he was saying some things and I just had to remind him, like, you know, I'm still the same person, because they'll accuse me of being brainwashed. And so my communication with him was like, I'm not brainwashed. I'm actually just more clear. Like, I'm looking at scripture and understanding scripture and looking at what's becoming so divisive within the church and wondering why, and finding that the answer lies in a framework that is antithetical to the gospel. But I mean, we left that with, we're going to agree to disagree. I love you, but you know, there's that. Yeah, my public page, the Center for Biblical Unity, is run by my friend Krista by and large. So I don't have a lot of dealing with that. I do run my own Twitter. And I had someone get on the other day and was like, biblical unity isn't the way, and basically you're crazy. And so I just hit it. But yeah, I haven't had as many phone calls lately. We'll say that. So, but again, it has to come down to a thing of obedience. I have to be obedient to what the Lord has told me to do. I have to stand for truth. And not this, I have to, like, I serve some legalistic God who was like, do this or else. But I have an opportunity to speak truth. I have an opportunity to fight for the underdog. I feel like the way that white people are being treated right now kind of makes them the underdog in a lot of things. And so I use my voice to speak into that space. You know, if you're a person of color and you feel like you don't have the opportunity or the ability to be racist because of how racism is currently defined, and so you put out all kind of things that, you know, spew this even more covert hatred toward whites, you know, that's wrong. And I'm going to say something. And if you're white and you know, say stuff against people of color, I'm going to say something. It's just who I am. And I believe that there's a biblical way for unity. And what we see today isn't that. So yeah, no, people ain't knocking on my door. I'm not getting the Valentine hearts and, you know, all that. But
so
that's
why,
okay.
So you know as well as I do that what you're feeling, you're certainly not alone in that, but a lot of people just keep their mouths shut because they don't want to ruin friendships. They don't want to get the kind of blowback that you got. So why do you persist in this? Why don't you just kind of keep your head down and maybe everything will go away?
Because that's not what the Lord has called me to. You know, I don't really know what else to say aside from, I feel like the body of Christ, and he had to bring me here, the body of Christ is a family. And if we're a family, then you just don't let people come in your house and do your family any kind of way. You know, like that just is what it is. I'm gonna fight for the family. And I feel like there are people who, you know, secretly send me notes and encourage me, or they'll call. And like, I had a friend, I hadn't talked to her in about 12 years. And she called me and was like, or she sent me an email and asked if we could have a conversation. So I called her, and she was just like, I just wanted to say thank you for, you know, using your voice for truth. And I was like, wow, like I haven't talked to you in 12 years. This is awesome. People will send me like encouraging notes on, like through our CFBU messenger and things like that. So people email the Center for Biblical Unity and send in encouraging notes. And I don't know the color of these people. If they're on Messenger, yes, I can see that. And, you know, that's awesome. I think those things help to keep me going, because it can be very discouraging to feel the other side, or to know, like, you know, that sushi dinner is, you know, going to be put off for a while. but at the same time, the reward is knowing that I'm doing what the Lord is asking me to do. And, you know, this isn't to make me some uber righteous person, or some, you know, oh, just me and Jesus. No, like, this is hard. This is hard for real. Like, let's just be honest. And yet I know, because he speaks to my heart of like, this is what I want you to do next. You know, like, there are steps along the way. I quit my job in faith. And I know him to be provider, and he's providing. So, you know, I call me crazy. I have no idea. I just know that we can't sit by and watch the church go to hell, you know, like, and everybody, I don't know if you know who Lauryn Hill is, and I'm not sure if she actually coined this phrase, but there's a phrase that she has in one of her albums, and it says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I feel like that's the current state of the church right now. Like, there are many people in the church who are innocently saying, accept this way in order to be reconciled, or in order to be unified. You know, read White Fragility. You know, do this work, divest yourself of whiteness, lament, repent of your whiteness. And I'm just like, yeah, I know you got some good intentions, but don't damage people along the way. You know, and for people of color, I would say, you know, yeah, America has had some hellish stuff happen in her history, but we still don't repay evil for evil. You know?
Yeah. It's pretty hard to not say that's Jesus, because here's a guy who dies on the cross and says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. I mean, that's right at the center of the faith.
Yeah.
Wow.
But people flip that to be, well, he was talking about the marginalized people, or he wasn't talking about the Romans, or you're like,
who put him up on the cross? I mean,
I can't really answer, you know, and I can't condemn, you know, people who believe that, because I also held that belief. And now, can I get uppity and high and mighty and highfalutin and, you know, well, you know how they think. Sure, I can. I gotta watch myself. I told you, we started out with the fact that the heart is wicked, okay? But in reality, we have to, if we're gonna fight for the church, because to me, what's happening in culture right now isn't about black and white. It's about coming for the church, you know? And, you know, I have 1,000 steps that I see in order to get there, because people are like, what do you mean, you know, this isn't black and white? Of course this is black and white. I think if we look down the line a little bit, we can see that it'll be coming for the church and the Judeo-Christian beliefs. But if we can't model unity within the church, if we can't use our voice now, if I'm afraid of losing a friend, you know, or losing a job, what are you going to do when the persecution comes for your life? You know, what are we going to do? We have to be bold and take a stand now. And so, I'm just going to choose to stand.
Tell me about this Center for Biblical Unity. What's that about? This is your full-time gig now? This is
it's my full-time.
All right. So what's this about?
So
what are you doing? What are you up to? What do you want to do?
Well, what I thought I was going to do was, you know, some speaking here and there, and talk to some pastors about, you know, hey, this is how you can pursue unity in your church. But then George Floyd happened, and in 6 weeks, we went from having 39 followers. Like, I was so happy with my 39 followers. I was like, look at that. Now we have over 7,000. And I am like, what? I have no idea what to do. What is this? but it's really changed. The mission has changed for me, like my personal mission, to from being more of, let's go have this conversation, to really being a refuge for people who have been injured by critical race theory and that framework, and also being a battering ram in culture against this framework and against it coming into the church. Our mission is one race, one people, one savior. That is the goal. The goal is to understand that if you're in Christ, we are family. Now, I know sometimes brothers and sisters have their issues, but let's be clear. We have the same name. How do we walk out our unity? Not that you need to do work to be reconciled to me. The work of the cross has brought us together. We are adopted into the same family, thus reconciled in the same family. How do we walk together? So I'm putting out blogs. I'm doing podcasts. I've been invited to do church trainings and pastor trainings. So I'll be traveling soon, working on curriculum. The curriculum that's currently out there for small groups regarding race and racial reconciliation is CRT laden, or has CRT embedded in it. I don't really want to focus on racial reconciliation so much. I want to focus on the idea of unity. Like, that's the word we find in scripture. When in John 17, when the Lord prayed, he prayed that they may be one, that we would be unified and walk in unity. So how do we do that? This is the curriculum that I'm working on. And yeah, just using my voice to let all people know that, we are family in Christ, and we don't repay evil for evil. So just because a white person may have, oppressed someone in my family or oppressed me or something like that, it is my responsibility to forgive and not to repay evil for evil. And what is a biblical method for unity? What is a biblical way forward? How do we have a vision in the church for unity? And does that look like social justice? And if it does, why? So we just have these conversations every Thursday at 6. I do a family meeting, which is a live stream, and it really has no plan to it, no format. I might have some things that I hope to talk about, but anybody who wants to join in, Thursday at 6, I just go on through the CFBU Facebook page, and we just check in. How you doing today? Because we're family. I care about you. I want to make sure you eat, like, we should be one. We should be able to talk about hard things. We should be able to laugh together. And then I do a podcast with my friend Krista called All the Things, where we talk literally about all the things from a historically Christian perspective, though. But when we started this, we started because we noticed that there was a void in a lot of churches that we were seeing. In talking about just things that people were going through on the day-to-day, things that were happening in culture, so you have these things in culture, and then you get to church and he wants to talk about the breaking of bread. And, but did you know that this person over here had this happen and it was in all the news? So we're just talking about those things, and how should the church respond? What is our responsibility as Christ followers? So we do that. But yeah, my full-time gig is CFBU, and I appreciate it. It is a lot of work. It is, woo! I was like, Lord, my goodness. But I mean, I refer to the Center for Biblical Unity as a person usually. Oh, goodness. But I liken it to a newborn baby and all the work that needs to be done when you start a business. And so the Center for Biblical Unity is 5 months old. And so there are some things that still need to be worked out. I'm still learning how to, get my hands around it and have a rhythm and all that. But we're fundraising. Because I quit my job in faith, I needed to fundraise for my salary. Our 501c3 is still pending, but it is pending. Like, the paperwork has been accepted and received and all that. So it's pending. We're trying to figure out, if there's anything else that needs to be added. So I'm fundraising through Patreon. Yeah. And
these links can be found
through our website, centerforbiblicalunity.com.
Okay.
You can click on the donate button and you can give, one-time gift, or you can sign up to be a Patreon supporter and support monthly. It's really just about making sure that the church has a biblical framework for unity. And we also highlight other voices. I don't want to talk in a vacuum. I need other people. So we have Edwin Ramirez. He also came out of the critical race theory worldview. He's a Puerto Rican living in New York, and his world is completely different than mine. But he's an awesome man of God who holds a biblical view when it comes to unity. There is Elisa Childers, who speaks out against progressive Christianity. There's Neil Shinvey, who also, he's a theoretical chemist, and he does a lot of work, academic. I'm not very academic in like my speaking and teaching and things like that. But he is, and it's awesome because he reaches a whole different group of people. There's Sam Say, he's a writer and blogger, and he talks a lot about critical theory as well, and racism, and how do we have a biblical framework for it. Then there's Thaddeus Williams. He's a professor at Biola University, and he just wrote a book called Confronting Injustice Without Compromising Truth, 12 questions every Christian should ask about social justice. And so with that, everyone I've mentioned previously has contributed in some way to his book, including myself. And that book comes out in December, but it really asks good questions on what should we be thinking about social justice? How should Christians view social justice? What is our part? You know, when I think about social justice, one, I usually just call it justice because justice is the biblical word. And excuse me, justice is only social because it involves humans, but it's still justice. It's only justice, you know? But historically, the church hasn't needed culture to tell it how to work or what good works to do. This is something new that we've adopted, this idea that, you know, as Christians, we need to be told by culture when to speak, when not to speak, where I should be going, and all of those things. So yeah, I would say, you know, if you check out our resources on our website, you'll become acquainted with other voices. Sam Say, Elisa Childers, Edwin Ramirez, Neil Shinvey, Thaddeus Williams, they're all doing good work. And we were beginning to form a little hub, you know, of voices, because yeah, it needs to be like, I can't just do this by myself.
Yeah. Although I get the sense you can do a lot. You have been, Monique, you have been a joy to, I thank you so much for sharing your story. Thanks. Because your story is powerful. And well, like everybody's, I mean, on my channel, I do, these videos don't always get as many views as other videos, but these videos where people share their story, because, you know, your story is beautiful and it's impressive, and I'm inspired by your faith and by your commitment to Christ, and because it's clear that your obedience and your discipleship has cost you, and it's going to cost you more, you know, just knowing the current climate and the way conversations are going, the momentum that one side has right now, means that, you know, I fully expect others will flame you on Facebook, and people will not want to return your calls. But I admire your courage and the strength of your convictions. And I don't know, it's you know, people told me, they said, "Oh, Paul, you got to talk to her. You got to talk to her." And it's like, okay. And then we had a little short phone call before this, but I'm just inspired by your story and what God has done in your life, and it's really beautiful and impressive. So thank you for putting yourself out there and sharing your story like this.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm telling you, there's a lot more, but
and you're a good storyteller. I mean, not everybody has their story, but you share your story well. Any other things you wanted to say, or any questions you had for me, or anything that you wished we had talked about but didn't?
No, I feel like if people didn't catch your interview on Unsafe Space, I feel like that's a good video, like as a prelude to this one. Or I don't know what the after of a prelude is, but you know, but I think it would be good having people get if they're not familiar with critical race theory, getting familiar with that. But no, I've enjoyed this very much. And I thank you for reaching out to me on Twitter. I was like, who is this? Why are people messaging me on Twitter? What in the world? And so, but I'm so glad that you did it. It's been, yeah, a blessing. And I so appreciated our first conversation and this one. And so I thank you. I thank you very much. I'm grateful for your voice and your work in this space too, and giving, the opportunity to tell my story. I think a lot of times when people, when I'm in interviews, it's more just about the work and not about like the story of, who I am. And so, yeah, I am, I'm really grateful. And yeah, thank you.
I just, like I was saying, I got contacted by a friend of mine who works in anti-racism in my denomination, and he wanted me to interview some very high-profile figures. And I told him, I'm not really into interviewing them. I want to talk to you, so I'm going to have my friend on. And he's, I know some of his story, but I can't wait to learn more of his story because, part of me does believe that, what I've seen in this move. So I grew up very much with second wave anti-racism because, John McWhorter's been talking about this and about third wave anti-racism. It's sort of analogous to third wave feminism because, I grew up and my parents were both white, and neither of them had hardly any experience with African-American community or Black folks at all. And they moved to Patterson, and they move in and they live in, and we worship together and we share life together. And these were the people that raised me. These were the elders in my church and the parents of my friends. And, but then, obviously when I'm a teenager, and we had this day camp program in our church, and I became a day camp counselor. It's kind of like Vacation Bible School, basically. And I had, gone to a different school and, had relatives in different parts of the country. And so that was my growing up. But then I began to, figure out what my parents had known, of course, that, these kids that I'm teaching Bible school to, most of these kids, that they don't go more than 5-6 blocks from their house. And I remember, I was their day camp teacher, and most of the other teachers were Black, but, here I'm the white guy. And finally, these kids had never had an opportunity to know white folks up close. And so, yes, they're checking out my skin and they're feeling my hair. And of course, I mean, these kids are they're younger than I am, and I'm their teacher, but I'm their friend and we like each other. And so they feel comfortable. And so, they're exploring me. And like when I go to the bathroom, the boys would want to make sure that, is that white all over really? I mean, even the places that we don't see. And, but that's people. This is normal. Yeah. And this is, and so.
But what they'll do today is make that so abnormal. Like so much of what is human behavior is now being labeled as white behavior. This idea of white fragility. No, that's actually human behavior. Because if you call me out my name, my Peter nature is going to come out and I might cut off your ear. Like yes. Yeah, we didn't get into that part of my story, but I do have I am either Jeremiah or I am Peter.
Well, maybe we'll have to come back and do another conversation and you can fill in some of those things too.
Pete, I would love that. But yes, my Peter nature. But no, I mean, I remember taking kids to camp, and now I can't swim, and we can talk about all that on the next time. Oh, wow, some of us don't swim.
I don't.
But I know you know. But I jumped in the water. Now my hair, when it's not in braids, my hair is very thick, and like I'd wear an afro or whatever. And I jump in the pool, I go all the way under, and I come up, and my hair was dry. I mean, it looked dry by and large. And this kid, he had to be like 8 or 9. He was white, and he was like, and he like stopped in his tracks and was like, "How is your hair not wet?" And I was like, "It's magic." Like, I don't know. And he was like, shame. I was a mess with those kids. And he was like, "Can I touch it?" And I mean, it was out in an afro. It wasn't in braids. And he was like, and so he touched it and he felt it. But I mean, this curiosity is part of the human nature.
Yes.
But right now in our society, we, demean it and makes people, you know, we make people out to be less than when they're curious.
Yeah. They
you know,
don't
like
dare ask.
Don't dare ask. And I'd much rather you ask,
Yeah.
you know, than to create judgments.
Yeah.
Now I'm not Google. I don't need to answer every question, but I think that questions, you know, they really help to foster relationship. Yeah.
That's how we get to know. That's how I got to know you today.
Yeah.
I just pretty much asked questions, and
yes,
and I'm curious.
That's okay.
And so, no, this was wonderful. This is wonderful. Yeah. I have to wrap this up, but thank you so much, Monique. I'll post this tomorrow. You can go and there'll be comments, and you know, comments are comments, but most of them, the community around me is quite affirming, and it's unusually. My community is very diverse. There's some Christians and non-Christians and all that, but generally speaking, people are quite well behaved and eager to know one another. And I actually think this. I actually think we should all strive to be anti-fragile. In that, let's be curious, let's be respectful, let's be open and accepting. And this is part of So I know I probably among some people have a stench now because I haven't jumped on all the bandwagons everyone assumes I should have jumped on in the way I should have jumped on them. But I agree with you that, you know, when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, and he also says, love your enemy, that means love your neighbor all the way up to and including your enemy. And our master is someone who died for people who hated him enough to trump up some charges and get the state to kill him. That's who our master is. And I do believe once people, you know, everybody has a master. I mean, Bob Dylan says you got to serve somebody, and that's true. Everybody has a master. And I think my master is best because my master will die for his enemies. And so, and I know it's hard to have a master like that sometimes because naturally I want to hate my enemies. That's what wells up inside me. And I love your story, and I just love how you told your story, and I love your story, and I'm so excited to share this video.
Yay, thanks. I can't wait.
So
can't wait.
Thank you so much, Monique. And
thank you.
And I'm sure, you know, just let me know if, you know, we'll wait a few weeks and such, but if you decide you want to talk again, and if you find that this is helpful to your effort, just let me know. And I say just message me with the time and the date. You know, you got my details. I got your details. All right, send me a couple of dates, and we'll get it going. I'm definitely open. Real good. Thank you so much for this. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.